Well done, Well done.
Will.
Thank you.
Well, the captain's now level at 2 each. See you next week, BBC1, same time, same place. Till then, goodbye.
No gambler can resist a dead cert, so let it ride. The comedy starring Richard Dreyfuss on BBC2 shortly.
Is it clear? Go, go, go!
Was the mounted section sent in to bring under control a riot which, so far as we can establish, may have been caused by 2 men and a dog?
I don't care about your public confidence. I'm battling for this police force.
The ACC ops isn't ill. He's been suspended.
What happened wasn't an accident. It was a tragedy born of negligence.
Between the Lines in half an hour on BBC1.
That's after the news now on BBC1 with Martin Lewis. It's 9 o'clock.
The head of the RAF apologises for making a speech widely seen as an attack on the Chancellor and the Chief Secretary to the Treasury. Sir Michael Graydon says his apparent criticism of the Treasury for questioning the efficiency of the armed forces was misinterpreted. A leaked document suggests ministers ignored government research when making party conference speeches criticising single mothers. 1,500 miners in Yorkshire are facing redundancy after the announcement that British Coal wants to close 3 more pits. Good evening. The Chief of Britain's Air Staff, Sir Michael Graydon, has tonight publicly apologised to Kenneth Clarke and Michael Portillo for a speech which implied the Treasury had attempted to denigrate the armed forces as inefficient in order to justify defence cuts. Sir Michael said he regretted that his remarks had been misinterpreted, as his sole intention was to refute what he called some of the more serious misrepresentations in the press. And he added, "I have no evidence that any Treasury Minister has instigated a press campaign against the RAF or the other services." Mr Portillo and Mr Clarke responded immediately with a statement saying they were confident that no Treasury official had offered any briefing to the press on defence matters.
It didn't take long today for Michael Portillo and Kenneth Clarke to extract an apology for last night's criticism. They were said to be furious with Sir Michael Graydon for accusing them, however indirectly, of undermining the services with leaks to the press. Sir Michael Graydon had known that as a serving defence chief, his remarks would be politically sensitive, and he'd refused to let us film his speech last night to limit its impact. Yet he probably hadn't reckoned on the reaction nonetheless. A meeting with an angry Defence Secretary this morning and pressure to apologise. That he agreed to do. In identical letters to the Chancellor and the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Sir Michael concedes, "I have no evidence that any Treasury Minister has instigated a press campaign against the RAF or the other services. My sole intention was to refute some of the more serious misrepresentations in the press." Several stories had alleged the RAF was top-heavy and inefficient, and when they appeared last month, defence officials had privately accused the Treasury, including Mr Portillo, of planting them. Treasury ministers were at that time in the final stage of setting the defence budget. Tonight they denied there was any campaign, and one former colleague said they were anyway just doing their job.
Just as people in the armed forces and their supporters in Parliament have made known their dissatisfaction with the prospect of cuts, so I dare say the Treasury are articulating their case. But then that's why we have a Treasury. You know, it's no point complaining that a dog barks. The Treasury's job is to curb public expenditure.
But within the armed forces, especially the RAF, Sir Michael's criticism had gone down well. With the forces stretched to meet new commitments like patrolling the no-fly zone over Iraq, and with more cuts imminent, there was relief that at last one of the chiefs had spoken out.
We are being faced with a series of debilitating and apparently unplanned, unsequenced cuts launched by a Treasury which appears to think the British Armed Forces can be run like a privatised industry, and manifestly they can't.
The Defence Secretary Malcolm Rifkind knows the chiefs feel that way as well. But he believes he's managed to stave off the worst of the Treasury's demands for cuts, and he wants their backing. The problem is that the RAF chief wasn't alone in his opinion. The head of the army, Sir Peter Inge, was at last night's speech, and I saw him nodding in agreement at the main points. The First Sea Lord has also endorsed the speech. Tonight's apology won't remove the strain between chiefs and ministers as defence cuts bite. David Shookman, BBC News.
Well, I'm joined now from Westminster by our political editor, Robin Oakley. Robin, an unprecedented speech and then an amazing apology, all within 24 hours. What's going on?
Well, rows between the Treasury and the Defence Department, when you've got a tight spending round like we've had this year, are a traditional part of British pageantry, really. And the Defence Chiefs knew early on that the Treasury had targeted them for big cuts, so it's got particularly bitter. What you get at a time like this is caricature politics, with Defence Chiefs arguing in private that the Treasury is a bunch of skinflints who know the value of everything, know the price of everything and the value of nothing, and Treasury people arguing that Defence Chiefs want every gadget their boffins could possibly produce for them and can't really do their sums. What Sir Michael has done is to bring that kind of backroom arguing into the foreground. He's overdone the political comment and he's been forced to eat humble pie.
And how heavily was he lent on by the government in order to make him eat that humble pie and apologise tonight?
Oh, undoubtedly, he's been lent on very heavily. The Treasury ministers were furious at the suggestion they'd been denigrating the forces. Michael Portillo contacted Malcolm Rifkin, the Defence Secretary. He then carpeted Sir Michael, and I think if he hadn't produced an apology and the letter that he's produced tonight, then he might possibly have been forced to resign.
Very briefly, Robin, the defence cuts appear to be all signed and sealed last week. Why raise it again?
Well, there is a puzzle about that. I think it's a sign of the bitterness that has been engendered by this row, really. And it's strange that when the sums have all been settled, Sir Michael should continue. I think it's a sign that the grumbling as far as the defence chiefs will go on.
Robin, thanks very much indeed. The government has been attacked by the Labour Party and groups representing one-parent families after the leak of a confidential Cabinet Office paper which suggests that ministers are considering cutting benefits to single mothers. The leaked document says the primary objective is to reduce the burden on public expenditure. It appears to cast doubt on the validity of some recent claims by ministers about single mothers.
Back to basics is the Prime Minister's autumn rallying cry to his troops. Talk of family values and deterring single motherhood sets the moral mood of the moment. But so far there's been little hard policy to go with it. The leaked Cabinet document was prepared in September by officials from several departments and sent to the Cabinet Committee in time for the conference. But when ministers rose in serried ranks at the Tory party conference to denounce single motherhood, they appear to have deliberately ignored the research assembled for them by the Cabinet Office. Housing Minister Sir George Young called for single mothers to get lower priority in permanent housing. But the report says there is no evidence that single mothers become pregnant to secure a council house, and keeping them in temporary accommodation could cost more. The Home Secretary said lack of a father caused crime.
With few adult male role models around, they're all too likely to succumb to peer pressure. And inevitably they're likely to emulate the most aggressive, the most rebellious boys in the neighbourhood.
But the document says it does not appear that lone parenthood is itself associated with crime. However, today the Home Secretary rejected the Cabinet Office research summary and quoted another piece of research which supported his view.
Many single parents bring up their children in an entirely admirable way. But the recent research to which I referred has demonstrated that there is a link between the absence of a father and a number of disadvantages for the child, including criminality.
The leaked document lists many options, including possible cuts for the Social Security review, reducing extra benefits for lone parents, cutting benefits to parents who separate as an incentive to keep them together, making parents of young single mothers financially responsible for their daughters. Young mothers in a Great Yarmouth hostel today denied that the benefit system had anything to do with why they got pregnant. Most had expected the fathers to support them.
I had my baby when I was 16. And I expected to stay with his father, but obviously things don't always work out that way, the way you want them to.
Many said trying to live at home with their parents, as proposed by the document, had been a disaster.
I stayed at home, I lived with my parents. When I got pregnant, my boyfriend moved in and stayed with my parents.
There was a lot of strain at home. There's so many of us living in one house, and it just didn't work out. My boyfriend left.
The document says that one of the best ways to get single mothers off benefit would be to provide childcare so mothers can work. Labour today called on the government to make policy on the basis of that research.
The trouble is, these ideas have been swept aside because they just don't fit in, as far as one can judge, into the hard right agenda that is being pursued by Messrs. Portillo, Lilly, Redwood et al. And I just wish that instead of trotting along behind, the Prime Minister might for once try and assert a little authority in the government and promote a really constructive debate about the best way forward for lone parents.
The Social Security Secretary today appeared not to favour cuts in benefits to single mothers. He pinned his hopes instead on the new Child Support Agency.
There are 1 million lone parents in this country now dependent on benefit. 3 out of 4 receive not a penny of regular maintenance from the absent father. That's why we established the Child Support Agency, to see that greater maintenance is paid to help them, and that often helps the mother get off benefit, return to work, support her child.
The document underlines the difficulties the government would have in trying to frame moral policies to prevent single motherhood.
Already the Child Support Agency has run into deep problems by delving into the complexities of people's personal relationships with a blunt statutory instrument. Many of the recommendations in this report would have the same effect, making no distinction between deserving and less deserving cases. Some of the options have already been rejected. But having made single mothers and traditional values their big issue, the government still needs to produce a policy to go with the rhetoric. Polly Toynbee, BBC News, Westminster.
3 more pits in Yorkshire are to have their future reviewed and will probably close over the next few months. Nearly 1,500 miners could lose their jobs. The pits are Bentley, Hatfield and Frickley, all in South Yorkshire.
The miners of South Yorkshire never had much faith in the 12-month reprieve granted after the public outcry last autumn over the pit closure programme. Today, their representatives went to the northern headquarters to hear British Coal announce and explain how 1,500 jobs and 3 more collieries were to disappear. Afterwards, the anger was genuine, the defiance routine.
Most pits that have gone into review have not been closed by British Coal, they've been closed by men running. This time, they've got to stand and they've got to fight.
There's one thing you can say about the miners. The miners has always fought. It's just unfortunate other people didn't join us. I think if other people had joined us in the 8 to 4, 8 to 5 dispute, the country, never mind the miners, wouldn't be in the state we're in today.
Bentley Pit near Doncaster is one that will close. For 90 years it's produced coal, but now almost all the output is stockpiled. The miners are resigned to unemployment.
I mean, I feel more sorry a lot for younger lads and all. I mean, lads who's 20, 28-year-old, who's never had aught else but fate. I mean, where are them lads going to go?
We're all fed up with it now. We're ready for whatever comes now. We've had enough. We've messed about too long.
British Coal said the pit's future had to be reviewed because of a major market squeeze. Power stations would burn 7 million tonnes less coal than expected, half of which should have been supplied by Yorkshire collieries. Miners expect the closures by Christmas, March at the latest. Communities which are totally dependent on coal believe they are being sacrificed in a fixed marketplace. John Thorne, BBC News, South Yorkshire.
The leaders of Northern Ireland's unionist parties have said hopes that there could be peace in the province by Christmas are unrealistic. They were speaking after separate talks with the Prime Minister in Downing Street. Mr Major has been trying to get agreement to restart multi-party talks on Ulster's political future.
Ian Paisley and his party are seen as the unionist hard line, and their position certainly didn't change today. They have their own as yet unpublished plan for restarting talks, but they won't go back round the table on any of the other current formulas, nor until they're satisfied on what for them are 2 crucial issues, including the articles in the Irish Republic's constitution which lay claim to Northern Ireland.
As long as John Hume continues to talk to IRA Sinn Féin, and as long as Articles 2 and 3 are not dealt with, we will not be in any talks. Full stop. Is that plain enough to you?
And in what circumstances would he ever sit down with Sinn Féin?
None.
The leader of Northern Ireland's largest party, Jim Molyneux, is more conciliatory, with a welcome for the principles agreed by Mr Major and the Irish Prime Minister Albert Reynolds at the recent EC summit. But Mr Molyneux accuses the Irish leader of backtracking since then.
It does look to me as if Mr Reynolds is rowing back from that position
and as if he's at least contemplating some kind of link-up with the Hume-Adams talks, which can only mean a quite unacceptable concession or series of concessions to terrorists.
So the latest apparent momentum in Northern Ireland politics hasn't yet bridged the fundamental differences between the parties. Mr Major has now met all 4 Northern Ireland party leaders involved in the previous talks, and while all sides want peace and they all want progress towards political agreement, there's no consensus as to how either of those objectives are achieved. The Prime Minister's recent involvement may eventually help restart talks, but no one expects that to be soon. Dennis Murray, BBC News, Westminster.
Solicitors acting for the Princess of Wales have issued High Court writs against Mirror Group newspapers, the gym where she was secretly photographed, and its owner. They're seeking a permanent ban on publication of the photographs.
The Daily Mirror today protests that the Press Complaints Commission gave it no chance to defend itself and calls its critics a shabby crew of hypocrites. Now it's been offered a chance to put its case in court. The Princess's writ was served on the Mirror by an uncomfortable-looking representative of her solicitors. It demands a ban on further publication of the pictures and for the photographs to be handed over or locked away. A similar writ was served on the gym where the pictures were taken. The Princess hasn't asked for damages, but both writs call for an account of the profits made from selling and publishing the photographs. It's understood she wants that money paid to charity. As John Bryan, friend of the Duchess of York, discovered, you can't sue for invasion of privacy under English law. So the Princess is suing for breach of contract and breach of confidence in what could be an important test case. In a letter to The Times, one leading lawyer says the law of confidence can be extended to protect personal privacy. Others disagree.
As far as the law of confidence is concerned, that usually applies where there is some relationship between the parties, such as employer and employee, and you entrust information in confidence to another person. Maybe it's a doctor or a banker or something like that. But here it's very difficult to see that that kind of relationship existed with the gym, and the law of confidence, in my experience, has never been stretched so far.
Tonight, the Princess was at a banquet for the Malaysian royal family. Mirror says she had a letter from the gym 3 years ago promising her confidentiality. The paper wouldn't say whether it planned to fight the case. Nick Hyam, BBC News.
The police in Jersey have discovered what appear to be human remains while searching for the bodies of a wealthy couple who disappeared 6 years ago. One of their sons, Roderick Newell, visited the alleged scene of their death last night. He's pleaded guilty to both murders. The police found the suspected human remains several feet down under a plastic sheet. The Russian President Boris Yeltsin has published a draft constitution giving him sweeping new powers. In a television address, he said that above all, the country needed order and stability. Russians will vote on the constitution on December the 12th, the same day as elections are held for a new parliament.
President Yeltsin went on television tonight telling his people the draft constitution just published will be a powerful tool with which to solve Russia's most difficult problems. It will certainly solve some of Mr. Yeltsin's, because this 66-page document gives the president much more power than the parliament. As newspapers here prepared to publish the text of the long-awaited constitution, it was clear Mr. Yeltsin wants no repeat of the stalemate where the old parliament would try to block almost every move he made. Today's draft would give the president power to dissolve the parliament in certain circumstances, and he could appoint key ministers, judges and officials. He could only be impeached by an almost impossibly cumbersome process. And to overturn the president's vetoes, Parliament would need a 2/3 majority. But even some radicals, like the world chess champion Garry Kasparov, don't like the constitution and don't think it'll last long.
Probably it was a good idea when the parliament was quite conservative, but I think today we're facing the situation when the parliament will definitely become more radical than the president. And the constitution will be very old and outdated, probably at the time of the election.
As they repair the old parliament after Mr. Yeltsin's tank shelled it last month, the president promised that this new constitution would prevent any further confrontation between the two branches of power. Mr. Yeltsin said tonight that his constitution will set the seal on Russia's break with her communist past. But critics argue it will simply make the president too strong, and that while Mr. Yeltsin may be a Democrat, no one can be sure the same will be true of his successors. Ben Brown, BBC News, Moscow.
A Home Office pathologist has told the James Bulger murder trial that the toddler received at least 30 separate blows to his body and died from multiple head injuries. The jury was asked to examine a 2.5-foot metal bar which the prosecution alleges was used in the attack. Two 11-year-old boys have denied abducting and murdering James.
The judge and jury have been listening to a pathologist's detailed account of the injuries inflicted on James Bulger before he died. They examined the objects alleged to have been used in the attack. A court officer handed up to the judge, Mr. Justice Morland, a heavy metal bar 2.5 foot long. Before passing it on, the judge remarked, "It really is very heavy when you handle it." The court also heard from pathologist Alan Williams, who, in some of the most harrowing evidence today, described the results of his post-mortem examination. Mr. Williams said James had suffered at least 30 separate blows, many apparently from bricks. He said the child